got a great film to play, just
hello? Have you ever snubbed a lady?
we had a technical problem.
Are we on?
Yeah, we're on there.
Can I swear? Shit!
Welcome to Crunch and Roll, a podcast about the side of the radio industry that most people never hear about, featuring some of its most interesting characters. My name is John Fox, and I've presented the Odd Breakfast Show here and there around the country over the last couple of decades, so I like to think I'm qualified to ask my guests the questions that we've all been dying to hear the answers to. Now, some of my guests have been synonymous with the stations they spent most of their career at. Fresh at Beacon, of course, Elliott Webb at BRMB, and my guest today is undeniably Mr Invicta. He spent most of this century there, including 19 years on breakfast. Incredible. He also had an ill-fated stint on XFM Breakfast, which he goes into on this episode. Along with stories about his on-air bromance with Jeremy Kyle, how he paid for his own jingles for an imaginary radio station, and the best on-air swearing story ever. Before we start, just our regular reminder that if you do enjoy the podcast and you'd like to support us, you can do that on Ko-fi. Just head to ko-fi.com/crunch and roll. And let's do that. Let's crunch and roll. Oh, yeah. James, how are you?
John, lovely to speak to you on this fine day. And thank you very much for inviting me on to Crunch and Roll.
You said it was an honour, but I think you are up there with the best, James. It's our honour that you're on Crunch and Roll. So thank you very much.
Oh, well, no, thank you. I mean, it's great to have, done a little bit of prep, I suppose, to come on this and to look back, and then you start and you go, oh dear, my memory's not quite what it used to be, and then you start writing things down and looking in folders and files and playing stuff back, and it all comes flooding back, and you go, blimey, yeah, God, we did quite a lot in those years, didn't we?
A hell of a lot. Well, let's go through it. Let's go right back to the start. So you're from Portsmouth.
Well, born in Portsmouth. Mum and Dad were living in Leon-Solent, which was the other side of Portsmouth Harbour. The story goes, Mum went into labour. She drove herself to the hospital, and on the way crashed into a dustbin lorry. I don't know quite where my dad was. I suppose back in those days, that was 1970. They just didn't go, did they? They stayed at home and went, good luck, darling. So she crashed into a dust cart, and it ended up in Portsmouth Hospital, not for herself as well as me. And October 21st, 1970, that's when it all started. I think I got myself into music, really was a thing from about 8 or 9. I remember suddenly getting into ABBA and deciding that was brilliant, buying ABBA LPs, ABBA and Boney M. We were then living abroad at the time for my dad's work, and I was in Vienna in Austria, and I remember going to an Austrian record store I was about 9 years old, and buying Boney M's Night Flight to Venus for myself in shillings, I think it was back then. And that really continued through the 80s. The 80s was an amazing decade of music, and I got so into, from probably 82 onwards, buying singles. I think the first single I bought randomly, was Mirror Man from the Human League. Then there was Michael Jackson, and I think it must have been probably 83, 84, we were living in Surbiton, just outside Surbiton at the time, and I started listening to Capital and listening to who was on there. Not particularly closely, but I was listening to it and going, this is cool. This sounds fun. Even then, the likes of Roger Scott and sax and all of that. And I think I then parked it there and then, and I didn't really think much more about it until, I don't know, it must have been the late 80s when I started going, this is really interesting me. And I got, I suppose, into Radio 1 at that time, I think, as most of us did. That was, for me, that was its heyday. Steve Wright in the afternoon, that was an appointment to listen. Big Boy Bates doing our tune, Gary Davis's bit in the middle, the Day-to-Day Challenge, all of that sort of thing. And I was going, I don't know, it must have been the late 80s when I started going, this is really interesting me. And I got, I suppose, into Radio 1 at that time, I think, as most of us did. That was an appointment to listen. Big Boy Bates doing our tune, Gary Davis's bit in the middle, the Day-to-Day Challenge, all of that sort of thing. And I was going, I don't know. I love music. I love gadgets. I love buttons. Maybe, I don't know, maybe I could give this a go. So yeah, listening to Tommy Vance, Steve Wright, yeah, all of that lot. And so the late 80s, I decided I needed to try and make this happen. I had no idea, as we well know. There's no classifieds for this. You don't apply to be someone on the radio. And we were living back again on the south coast by this time, and my gran lived in Gosport. If anyone knows Gosport, you'll know Seaward Tower, one of the blocks of flats, and I was staying with her. And again, the memories are a little bit blurry, but I think I just phoned up Ocean Sound. Ocean Sound had started broadcasting fairly soon before I made this phone call. And I phoned them up, and I got through to Jim Hicks, and Jim put me actually on to then Guy Hornsby, top bloke, amazing guy. And I said, look, I mean, I was 16, I think, at the time. I said, I can't remember the conversation, but I basically said, I don't know whether this is of any interest or can I do this, but can I just come in and see how it's done? Can I see what you do? And he said, yes, of course, do that. He was doing afternoons on Ocean at the time. And I remember my gran driving me to Sedgensworth West, to those hallowed studios, for me anyway. I was so overdressed. I really was. I think I was in a suit. And I went into this bustling room of news and production and 3 studios, and Guy greeting me there and saying, come on in. And then sitting there, and he did like a lunchtime quiz thing. And he said, can you compile some questions from the day's news? I went, yeah, great, okay. So I did that, and sat in on a show. And from then on, it was just, okay, no, this is it. This is what I've got to do. I didn't do any, I was still at school. I ended up not doing A-levels. So parents were a little bit panicky as to what I was going to do with my life. And I think it was at around this point that I did say I want to be on the radio. And I think parents fall into 2 categories, having listened to some of the other episodes of Crunch and Roll. A lot of them are very supportive, and a lot of them are going, there, darling. No, that's absolutely fine. That'll come out of your system and you'll get a proper job.
Yeah.
And I think I had a blend of the two with them, but they were saying, well, you do need to carry on with some sort of education. So I ended up going to Falmouth. I went to a technical college in Falmouth in Cornwall to learn how to build boats, because that's another great love of mine, is boats and sailing and that. But I was obsessed with radio. I was listening to Radio 1 avidly. I was buying DJ magazine. I was listening to things like, do you remember 31 Days in May? Where they had these amazing prizes every day throughout May. This must have been, 87? And I was just going, this just sounds so cool. And I was starting within the digs that I was living in. I was starting to sort of do Radio Bedroom there. And there was an ad in the back of DJ magazine. Get jingles made for, I don't know, I think it was 30 quid or something like that. These were the days when you went to college and you got a grant. You know, you didn't pay. It's not like university now or anything where you have a student loan. You got a grant from your council. And so I was getting this grant to be there, plus a bit of living money, which I spent quite almost 2 weeks worth on some jingles for a radio station that didn't exist. So I ordered these jingles and they came out and they were quite good. Now, the key here, the reason for telling this story is because I've never really got over this. So this is sort of 1987. And I decided that my Radio Bedroom radio station in Falmouth in Cornwall was going to be called Pirate FM.
No.
Yeah. Yeah, you know what's coming. Yeah. I remember I had a pencil case because I was doing technical drawing for this boat building course, and I had a pencil case, and I actually sort of drew the logo for Pirate FM in Tipex on this pencil case, and I sadly I've lost it now, but I got these jingles done for James Hemming on Pirate FM, where FM, and this was the thing that everyone took the mick out of, where FM means far more music. Now, you see, FM only really means far more. For some reason, I managed to get 2 M's out of that. But yeah, those of you who are observant, I left Falmouth probably in 1990. 2 years later, Pirate FM, for real, arrived on the airwaves in Cornwall, about 10 miles down the road in Redruth.
I'm starting to wonder if maybe you misplaced that pencil case around Falmouth and somebody picked it up and went, hang on, that's a cracking name for a radio station. You never know, James. You could be the reason that station started.
I like to think so, John. I like to think so, and it's always been one of my regrets that I never ended up working there, because that would have been the story I'd have told daily, probably on a show. So yeah, it was coincidence, who knows? But it's a fun story to tell. So I was learning how to build boats, but in the back of my mind, going, I've got to learn how to do this. I've got to be on the radio. I'm obsessed with listening to it. The only thing really to listen to down in Cornwall was Radio 1. And I would drive up to London, I'd drive home. My parents were now living on the Isle of Wight. And gradually around that time is when Radio 1 started switching on FM transmitters. It was still in medium wave down in Cornwall at the time. And that excitement of hearing that it was going to be coming to FM, it was a bit, I liken it to in the early days of, when your street suddenly got broadband, from dial-up. There was an excitement there that Radio 1 was coming to FM where you were. And so you drive through, up east through Cornwall and Devon and into Somerset, and then suddenly you'd start picking up some FM stations, FM frequencies for Radio 1. And all the while that was going on, of course, back in my home turf, Ocean was doing its thing. And I came home at the end of the, whatever you call it, the Christmas term, December 1988. And, there was no internet. I wasn't really following news, as it were, as far as radio goes and what was happening elsewhere, especially in Cornwall. You're in the middle of bloody nowhere. Yeah. And I came home Christmas 1988 and tuned into what I thought was going to be Ocean Sound on 103.2, Ocean Sound West. And it had changed. It had changed to what we all know now as 103.2 Power FM. And I went, oh my God. I mean, just listen to that. It was something else. And I remember being, I wasn't even working on it. I wasn't doing it. As a 17-year-old listening to that, I was so excited because you'd never heard anything like it at all.
We've had a few people talk about how amazing Power sounded at the start. I mean, what was it about Power that sounded so incredible?
Well, John, with my radio head on now, I can tell you it's all about the clocks. It's all about where everything. But it was how clever it was. It was the simple stuff, starting with 5 songs in a row. It was the production as well. Was not the first package, but the second jingle package was. You could put that on a station now, and it would still sound incredible. It was something like you'd never heard before. I think TM Century did it, and also I think I've heard other people talk about it. They're just the simple thing of, well, why don't we do the news before the top of the hour when everyone else is doing news? We're going to be doing 5 songs in a row, but the whole production of that, that it was 2 minutes to the hour, and those pips would hit, like the Greenwich pips. They were absolute sticklers for those pips at the top of the hour to be correct. And it sounded so awesome. And you look back on that now and you go, why didn't anyone else do that?
Yeah.
Because it was really simple, but boy, did it sound awesome.
We're having a party.
So you return home for Christmas in '88, and then is it true that you went abroad to work to go and work on yachts, but that love for radio remained?
Yeah. So Falmouth came to an end, and it was now time to, look for work, look for jobs, and I'd got a qualification now, City and Guilds in boat building. But I knew at the time that if anyone did ask me to build a boat, that would have been disaster. It would have sunk. It just was not correct. But foolishly, or some might say cleverly, I did add that obviously to my CV, and I joined an agency where, and it's still a big business today, where you put your name on an agency to go and crew on boats abroad. So they could be private boats, not so much cruise liners, but these are sort of posh yachts, really. Now, since then, and that was 30 odd years ago, things have got even bigger, and you've got massive yachts. But I wanted to see whether I could go and just go sailing, really, to earn some money. So I got picked up because of my boat building skills, because there was this boat that was wintering in Saint-Tropez. I remember it vividly. They said, look, we need to do some work on this boat. You look like you're a bit of a carpenter. Da-da-da. Would you like to come out and help? And I went, yeah, of course. And the money was fairly good. It was cash. And I remember driving to Heathrow with my dad, and it was the day that the Gulf War broke out. And it was chaos at Heathrow, and there was armed police, there was army, the whole lot. And I remember managing to get on a plane and flying to Nice and joining this boat. It was soon very quickly found out that I had no carpenter skills at all. I was crap. But they liked me, and I was quite good with plumbing. So I was in charge of toilets and basic electrics and things like that. And I stayed on the boat, and it was quite fun times. It wasn't the biggest of boats. The money was okay, and we toured the Med for the summer, and we did end up in Nice at some point. We were out in a bar and bumped in. There was and it's still going now, and people will know it. There's Riviera Radio on the Côte d'Azur, which is the English-speaking station down there, which for a time was owned by Capital. Anyway, we're in this bar in the old town of Nice, and I'm starting to chat to this guy who's a Kiwi, and I can't remember his name. But anyway, he turns out to be this guy who does the evening show on Riviera Radio that we're listening to every night. I go, oh, bloody hell, this is amazing. I said, can I come and sit on your show? So I end up getting a train round to Monaco, and I sit in a big RTL building, which is protected against earthquakes. It's got these massive doors, and I sat in on the show in Monte Carlo, whilst working on this boat. And again, it was one of those times where I just went, yeah, no, this really has got to happen. And it wasn't long after that I handed in my notice on the boat and flew back and thought, right, I've got to try and give this a bit of a go.
So you returned in 92. And
are you following this? Because I know it's quite complicated.
Well, do you know what I'm genuinely thinking? I'm sat here and I'm fascinated to listen to this. But at this point, you're 18 years old, and you've mentioned Nice, Monte Carlo, Vienna. I mean, you were well travelled at that age, weren't you?
I suppose I was, yeah. It was great living abroad. I've always enjoyed living abroad, and I would dearly do it again. But age, and not so much age, but just lifestyles really now, and the fact that I've got other people to be responsible for makes it. Oh, and Brexit, of course, it makes it a little bit harder. It was good fun while that lasted. But I knew I had to try and steer this ship in the right way to get to what I wanted. So I think I came back to the UK from doing boats and stuff in about 92 and found out that on the Isle of Wight, there was an Isle of Wight hospital radio. And I went up there and applied to become a member of Isle of Wight radio, a hospital radio. And there were various forms to fill out. There was, a bit of a questionnaire. There was, I suppose, a committee. Anyway, I seemed to, pass and get into it and just hung out there for a bit, watching people do what they did on Isle of Wight hospital radio. And it had an amazing record library as well. It had a huge record library, and it was fairly decent kit. There was no CDs or anything. We were still, on Technic's SL120s. I think that's what they're called, isn't it?
There's a blast from the past.
Yeah, 1200s.
1210s.
1210s
Yeah.
Mark II, yeah. And then one week, this other chap, similar age to me, he rocks up as well. And he goes, "Hi, my name's Richard." I went, "Oh, I'm James." Anyway, we became great friends. And the Richard I'm talking about is Rick Jackson, who's now doing breakfast, or did breakfast for a number of years on Wave, and he's now doing it on Greatest Hits on the South Coast. But also did breakfast on Power and worked on Isle of Wight Radio, but I'll come to that in a minute. So we were thick as thieves because we both wanted to do this. He was a baker. I was working in an offie. And we'd spend our lives in the hospital radio station, messing about, making stuff, doing shows. And I had my scheduled show was on Sunday, and it lasted a whole hour. But I must have spent most of Sunday prepping that show for an hour. It was so over the top. And I remember one day I forgot at home a record that I wanted to play. And I lived about 20 minutes away. And I drove home, all the way home, and then drove all the way back because I wanted to play that song to, let's be honest, nobody on hospital radio. And it was things like that. We were just writing things and coming up with ideas. And Rick was a natural as well. No, I'm saying as well. No, Rick was a natural. I wasn't.
Come on.
It was. I wish I probably do have some tapes somewhere, and I'd love to listen back to it because I think it would be horrific. So we were both avid fans of other radio that was, real radio that was going on. We loved Power. Mark Gedge, who's sadly no longer with us, who was Benson on Capital. I mean, awesome music jock, amazing. Andy Sheldon, Pete Wardman. And also a guy called Chris Kelly, who I think he did evenings. And he even had a feature called The Wet Patch, which was brilliant.
Come on, brilliant.
Yeah, it was 3 love songs. It was called The Wet Patch. Fantastic. Those were the days.
Yeah.
I think I should add here that I think the whole lineup through, from 88 and beyond, really, even into the Capital era, even probably post Rick being on Breakfast of Power, the lineup was amazing. They just picked the right people to do it, and Pete Wardman and all of that. And Chris Kelly had this. He obviously had his headphones too loud. This was in the days before health and safety and limiters and things, and he would have his headphones too loud. But at the time, Rick and I didn't really understand that was probably what was going on. But what we loved was that when he spoke, and he did talk a little bit like this, he was Chris Kelly on Power FM, there would be this feedback coming through his headphones. It wasn't so much a squeak; it was just a sort of a little bit of a howl. You know that sound, John?
Yeah.
Just that howl. Steve Wright used to have it sometimes when it was quite loud, and we loved that. And we thought, and our headphones in hospital radio couldn't go that loud. And we tried everything to recreate this sound of Chris Kelly. And we suddenly had the brainwave that there was a guest studio. So there was the TO studio where you'd do your, and then there was an interview guest studio which just had mics and a monitor, a speaker monitor. And so one evening we moved, and it was wired. It was on a loose wire. It wasn't wired into the wall or anything. We moved the monitor speaker into where we were doing our shows, so that when we opened the mic, obviously the speaker still was giving output, and so we tweaked it just enough so that you'd just get a little bit of feedback.
That's amazing, James.
And we were like pigs in shit like that. We were just going, this is brilliant. We sound like Chris Kelly on Power FM. How cool. And so we did probably a couple of weeks like that until someone found, well, no, I don't think anyone found out. We cocked up because after we left on a Sunday evening, we'd put everything back as it was. And there was this one Sunday that we didn't, and we we left the speaker trailing a wire out the door in the main studio, and the boss of the hospital radio, old chap, he'd been there since time began, was furious. He was absolutely furious, and we got suspended for a month from hospital radio.
Amazing.
I feel it's quite an achievement, really.
So let's move on to when you get your first full-time gig then, James. So when you get your first professional gig, how did that all happen for you?
Well, Isle of Wight Hospital Radio has a significant part to play in that. Rick and I had been doing hospital radio for some time. And I said, look, it's time. Let's put a tape together, each of us. Let's do that. And what's the worst? Let's drop it off. And Rick wasn't quite as confident as me. His on-air ability was vastly superior to mine. But day to day, he was going, oh no, we can't do that. And I was going, come on, let's do it. So we knocked up these tapes, and I dropped them in to Isle of Wight Radio, to reception. And didn't really think anything of it. Anyway, not that long, I think it was about a week later, we're back at hospital radio, and Rick goes, I got a phone call from Isle of Wight Radio. They want me to come in and have a chat and see what I can do. I went, oh, that's brilliant. Did you get a phone call? I went, no, not yet. No, but it's fine. Anyway, long and the short of it is, I drop these two tapes off. He gets a job. I think he got evenings. He got the evening show on Isle of Wight Radio. That didn't stop me joining as a bit of a volunteer. I just hung out there. I eventually did get my first paid gig on Isle of Wight Radio. Thank you to Andy Shire, another amazing programmer from Wave, who's done some awesome stuff over the years. He let me caretake for a couple of weeks. Again, it was ironically Sunday evenings, 4 hours of sounds of the 70s. I was 23 at the time, so kind of, enjoying the music, but it wasn't really my thing. But I was on the radio. I was literally on a radio station, and at the time, Isle of Wight Radio was still on medium wave, and there was something glorious about listening to yourself on medium wave in your headphones. Sometimes it got later, it would come and go a bit. The atmospherics would cause hassle. But I did, for 20 quid, I did 4 hours of sounds of the 70s a few times on Isle of Wight Radio. So that's the first paid pro gig that I did, John.
20 quid, James, 20 quid. 20
quid. But it was worth it for me. I was that, independent radio news ended. I had to do something. That was exciting.
Do you know, it's been, the build up to this, the years of dreaming of being a presenter and finally making it. How did it feel when you did that first link?
I remember I was very hot. I felt, I didn't, this is the thing. And I do remember even back then, there are things then and there are things now that make me far more nervous than I ever was having to press a button and starting to host a show on my own on a real life radio station. For some reason, I was hot, I was a little bit clammy probably, but everything else was fairly calm. It wasn't an overconfidence. It wasn't being cocky or anything. I can do this. It was nothing like. There was just an element of calm that this was finally what I felt comfortable doing. I wasn't a particularly comfortable teenager, and I don't know whether this was suddenly me entering into some sort of alter ego. I have no idea, but it just felt so right. And you've probably experienced that in the early days. You came to the end of that show, that 4 hours, and you were on an absolute high. You were exhausted, mentally exhausted, but you felt like you could just go and do it all again.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember doing my first gig was weekend overnights, and the show was a ridiculously long show. It was 1 till 7 in the morning, and I'd get a taxi back home for about 7:45, and I just could not sleep. I was just absolutely buzzing. It's such an amazing feeling.
You don't think of it as at the time, but it's a huge responsibility, isn't it? You're there. Your main responsibility is to keep this radio station on air, is to, hopefully keep some listeners, not to mess up, not to swear or just dick about. It's a huge responsibility, and they, gave you 20 quid for the privilege, but it was a great time to, it was that crossover, I suppose, into, okay, well, now nothing else is happening. Okay. This is now, for as long as I can, this is now the career. I've got to try and work this out. I'm not earning a living here doing this, but I've got to try and sort it out. And a few months went by, and I remember it vividly. It was a horrible winter's rainy day on the Isle of Wight. I was living at home. That was beginning to wear a bit thin as a sort of an early 20-year-old, wondering whether I was going to leave home. And a bit like phoning up Guy Hornsby at Ocean, and a bit like dropping the tape off at Isle of Wight Radio, I went, right, sod it. The other great station other than Power at the time in my head was Capital, obviously, but Fox FM in Oxford. Huge respect there. It had been on since, 89, I think, and everyone was talking about Fox. Everyone knew, again, the programming, the output of Fox was brilliant. So I thought, well, I'll phone them, which I did. I phoned up one rainy afternoon and amazingly was actually put through to Steve Ellis, who was the program controller at the time. He's no longer with us, but he was another superb programmer. I've been through quite a few PCs, and most of them are a little bit on the edge. And I don't know whether that comes with the territory, but he was cool, he was calm, he knew exactly what he was doing with this station and how he was programming it. Anyway, we ended up having this long conversation on the phone. It must have been over an hour, talking about radio and what I liked and interests and things. At the end of it, he said, well, why don't you come up and have a chat and come and meet me? So I did. I drove up to Oxford, had a chat with him. And this was on a Friday. He said, well, look, what I'd like is, are you okay to come back up here Saturday evening, like tomorrow evening, and could you maybe do the overnight show Saturday into Sunday? So I went, yeah. In my head, I was going, shit. But I was going, yeah, that's absolutely fine, Steve. No problem at all. Brilliant. He said, thank you very much. We'll see you tomorrow. So I drove all the way back down to the Isle of Wight, drove all the way back up, got there at really good time. Andy Green, another top bloke of radio, who's doing things in Banbury on Banbury licenses at the moment. He's a great man. He was doing evenings. We got on again like a house on fire. And I did the midnight till 6, a bit like you were saying, John. You know, your overnights were 6 hours. Yeah. I did midnight till 6 into Sunday morning. And I did a couple of those, and then I was offered the gig full time. And I left home. I rented a room in a house in Lake Street in Oxford, if anyone remembers or lives in Oxford. And that was really when the full-time job started. And I was doing midnight till 6 days a week. But, oh my goodness, it was just amazing. Absolutely amazing.
Do you know when we started doing some research on yourself and I saw Fox FM pop up, you're actually the first guest we've had on all of the Crunch and Rolls that we've done so far, the first person to have worked on Fox FM. And I'm so pleased because that was a great station as well, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. I mean, again, a privilege really to have, looking back on it, it was only 2.5 years, but for the time, it felt like I was there for a lifetime. But it was a blink of an eye, which is a shame almost. But just they got everything right. They absolutely owned Oxfordshire. The branding, Freddie the Fox, the Flying Fox. You know, they had a helicopter, the Unipart Flying Fox every morning. Phil Angel, one of my favourite breakfast presenters, was doing breakfast. Again, the lineup was superb. I eventually moved on to evenings, but then I was then doing a bit more production work on it and doing sweepers and things like that. And I would do evenings. I'd go, which was 8 till 12, and then I'd carry on. I'd go midnight till 6. I'd be making jingles and stuff, and I'd got to the station probably at 1 or 2 in the afternoon, but it was just the best time for me. This was everything. You know, that phrase, pig in the proverbial, it's absolutely true. I didn't have any responsibilities. I was getting I think £12,000 a year for it. But I was working, 18, 20-hour days. But I didn't care. I had this great satisfaction of going home at sort of 6 a.m, when everyone else was going to work. That felt really satisfying for some reason, that I could go to bed with the sun shining and while everyone else was having to go to work, because I didn't really think of this as work. And I'd say hello to Phil and we'd have a quick chat, quick coffee, and I'd go to sleep, wake up at 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, start the whole thing again. Awesome.
Is it true that whilst you were at Fox FM, a former guest, actually, of Crunch and Roll, Steve Power, he actually wanted you to go to Power FM, but Fox wouldn't release you. Is that true?
John, it is.
That is so sad. My heart actually broke when I read that.
So this is the thing. So at the time, Fox wasn't owned by Capital, but it then became part of the Capital Group. And I remember, and there was no email or anything like that at this time. You'd have in trays. Remember, on the top of filing cabinets, you'd have your own in tray. And to get your own in tray, I felt that was, with James Hemming on it, I thought I'm here, I'm staying. I remember there being a letter in the in tray, and it had the Capital Radio, franking machine stamp on it. I went, hello. Oh my God. Anyway, I opened it, and it was a letter from Parky, saying, look, we've been listening to you, we're interested, I can't remember I should have kept it, shouldn't I, really? Because that's quite a letter. Could we have a chat? So I think I ended up going to the Euston Tower and went into an office with Parky and Clive Dickens. And again, at the time, I'd never met them. I didn't really know them that well, so I was fairly relaxed. And we were just mulling stuff over, really. I think they just wanted to get a feel. And nothing really happened from that until I started getting contacted by Steve Power, who was, at the time, the program controller of Power. So, and since that December of 1988, all I'd ever wanted to do was work on Power. I mean, that's all ever... But I was also working on this amazing station called Fox. And he was saying, we'd really like you to come and join Power. And I'd only been at Fox probably 18 months or so, and I'd just entered into a new contract. So I went to the boss, who I think was Mark Flanagan. And I said, look, I've got this dilemma here. Power would love me to go down to the South Coast. And he went, no, absolutely not. I went, are you sure? He said, no, we love you. We want you here. And I remember Steve, and I've listened to Steve's Crunch and Roll, and he was, he does say that being a program controller wasn't his happiest of times. And he was furious. Absolutely furious. And I was trying to be I was fairly polite. I just said, I'm really sorry, I'm going to have to let you down. They won't let me go. And I was fairly peeved for a time, but then had to take a sort of stand. I took a step back and went, well, hold on a minute. Look what you are doing and where you are and what you're doing. And, everything happens for a reason and all of that. And it passed. But that was my one and only opportunity that I ever got to work on the station that I'd always wanted to work on. And it didn't happen. But you see, these things happen for a reason. I think it probably 6 months later, I met Claire. She was out with friends, mutual friends, and we were in this restaurant having dinner. I was meant to actually have gone out on another date with someone else who stood me up. And so I ended up with a friend of mine who said, oh, come out with us. There's a whole load of us going down the Cowley Road. I went, all right. I was a bit miserable. And ended up sitting next to this fabulous woman called Claire, who's now my wife.
I like it. You're the first person to interject some love into your episode. That's really sweet,
yeah.
James.
So 96, we met, and that would, if I'd ended up on Power, that wouldn't have happened. And the 4 kids and everything probably since that time wouldn't have happened. So you look back on it and you go, okay, fine.
Well, let's talk about 1997, because you moved to the station that I think you, of course, are best known for being part of. Some would say that you are Mr Invicta. So in 97, you go to Invicta FM in Kent. I mean, how did that happen? How did that all come about? Again, it was Clive Dickens. It was Clive and Richard. After the Power scenario, that kind of, it must have been about a year on. They said, look, we'd really like you to, actually, they really wanted me to go to Southern in Brighton. And so much so, I remember now, Claire and I, we and I, inverted commas, borrowed a Fox car and drove to Brighton to start house hunting. And we found a lovely place in the marina in Brighton. I was like, this is all right. I've got everything here. I've got radio, I've got boats, the whole lot. This is awesome. Brighton's great. Literally at the sort of the 12th hour, Clive phones up and goes, we don't want you to go to Southern. We'd love you to go to Invicta and do evenings at Invicta. I hadn't a clue where that was. He said, it's in Kent. I went, Kent, right. I have no connections with Kent at the time. But it was more money. It was part of the Capital Group, and I'd had a ball at Fox. And so I said, all right, I'll do that. So I packed up my cream 1.1L Fiesta with all my stuff. And I remember that first evening, driving into Kent. I'd organised a room in a shared house just outside Canterbury, and you went almost past the sign that says Kent on the N25, and suddenly we were in a blizzard. It was the snow. It was proper snowdrifts either side of the road. I was going, well, I hope I get to where I need to get to. And it was quite bad weather. This was January 97. And managed to get there, went into the station the next day, and program control. I'd never really spoken to anyone at the station at all. I'd only spoken to Clive Dickens. So got introduced to the program controller, who at the time was Paul Jackson, who's Richard Park's son.
Another amazing guy. Another, he's two peas in a pod, those two. I mean, when it comes to talent of running radio stations, it was awesome. And so he said, well, yeah, but he was very relaxed. And he said, okay, no, this is great. Just want you to do evenings and just do your thing, really. Just imagine being told to do that now in radio. Just do your thing. I mean, we wouldn't even do a playlist. He would say, well, look, come in, 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon and we'll just build the tunes. And so we would sit there in the afternoon with a tea and build out, I think it was 4 hours of music. And you go, oh, this is a good new one. And it was basically new, the idea was it was new music. It was a new music show. It was hotter than the rest of the day. And, it was around the time of Sash, Encore and Foix and Blue Boy and White Town and all of that stuff. And I was playing all of this and I remember playing Sash, Encore and Foix for the first time. And the XD phone number. Us Radio Lot know the XD, the white light, all red. The XD went and you think, oh God. Anyway, it was Paul and he said, oh, that sounded amazing. Play it again. So we, again, sort of things you don't really do now, but I think I left it a couple of songs. He said, we all love that. And that was the thing also. There was no real interaction of radio. There wasn't social media. There wasn't email. There was phone calls. And we did take quite a few phone calls on evenings and people would phone up and go, that was amazing. Play that again. And you go, yeah, all right. So it was very relaxed. It was great fun. And again, you'd go home on that high. Here I was I don't think I realized it at the time, the size of the county and the size of the area that it was covering, because Kent's big. And we had, I don't know, 6 different transmitters. I mean, it's crazy. So enjoyed doing evenings and covered breakfast a few times. Neil Francis was on breakfast, Neil and Sam. And it was the morning zoo. So covered that a few times and really had quite a fun time just, again, doing everything that I loved. I was really only doing shows at this point. There wasn't anything extra really at this point. So that was probably another sort of significant time in my radio career.
I think it's also worth pointing out that, you're on Invicta, you're doing evenings, but you're surrounded by some incredible presenters as well, aren't you?
I am. Neil Francis at Breakfast on the Morning Zoo, he, amazing presenter. Again, sort of taking that zoo format to a local station, took some work. I then was joined by this time I think I did evenings for about a year and then I was promoted to drive time. So that was 4 till 7. And they got this new presenter in who had moved up from Somerset from Orchard FM. He hadn't really done radio, but he was quite confident. He was a salesperson down at Orchard, down in Somerset. Anyway, Paul had seen him and spied him. I think he'd sent him a tape and he got the gig. And so I was introduced to this, again, amazing guy who just makes you feel brilliant. You know how some people that you can just be in their circle and they make you feel 10 times more confident than you are. You feel good about yourself. You're able to have a conversation. It's not all one. It's not all me from them. There's enough, banter. And so, come 7 o'clock on that, I think it must have been that Monday evening, I said, right, next up, Jeremy Kyle.
Wow.
Yeah. And Jeremy Kyle did evenings. And I look back on it now. We did that last hour of my show, of Drive. I don't think we ever asked to do this. We double-headed. We just decided that, instead of just doing, your typical sort of handover, a couple of songs before the top of the hour, we decided we would do this whole hour together, and it was Jim and Jez's happy hour. But I don't think we ever asked permission, John. I think this just sort of happened, and no one seemed to question it. And we just messed about, and a feature came that he became a doctor, and he became Dr. Kyle. And for some reason, he had a Scottish accent. And we would make up letters that he was being sent as a doctor. Dr. Kyle will see you now. And I would read these made up letters to him, and he would give advice. And the punchline was, he would cure whatever the problem was, or whatever the social problem was, or whatever relationship problem was. And he would say, and they'll be singing from the Highlands tonight, like that. And that was his punchline. And you look back on it now, and that was me, and that was Jeremy Kyle.
I'm just
it was
thinking,
awesome.
James, I mean, let's be honest, apart from the Scottish accent and the Highlands at the end, I mean, that was the start of the Jeremy Kyle show, wasn't it? Surely you devised that format.
I think so, John. Again, I think I'm missing, along with Pirate FM, I think I'm missing out somewhere. Which is nice you mentioned that, because it leads nicely onto this, that Paul Jackson then got the job of PC up at BRMB. And he wanted to take Jeremy and I to BRMB to literally do the shows that we were doing. So Jeremy was going to do evenings and I was going to do drive on BRMB. And again, like the bloody Fox situation, I'd only been there about a year at Invicta. And this time it wasn't anyone else saying no, it was me saying no. And I said, you know what, thanks, but no thanks. And again, you look back on that and you go, gosh, what would have happened, really? Claire had just moved down, we'd just moved in, and together in Kent, and I said no, and Paul and Jeremy, off they went to BRMB, where he was very successful doing essentially Dr. Kyle in the Midlands.
Well, there's nothing wrong with commission.
Testing.
The dealer does a lot of work
cold
in order to...
Well, I'm all for being open-minded, but I'm not all for discussing this live on air, thank you.
We are profoundly sorry.
All right, let's move on to the next station then, James. So, I mean, this is a bit of a curveball, isn't it? If you look at, where you went next. So in 98, you go to do breakfast on XFM. I am so intrigued as to how this happened.
So am I, John.
Was it not a good time?
It wasn't a great time. And I don't think I'm burning any bridges by saying that. It was a bit of a nightmare, I have to say. It was again, it was another meeting. Capital now obviously moved to Leicester Square. And Parky's PA phones up and says, Richard and Clive would like to have a meeting. I went, oh, hello. So in my head, I'm going, well, hey, 95 point great. So I go up, and there's another guy in this meeting as well, a guy called Des Shaw, who not soon after that, he's working for a production company, a television production company called Planet 24, which is owned by Bob Geldof. So we're sitting there, and they're going, how would you like to do a breakfast show on XFM? I think my reaction at the time, was politely excited. I was going, wow, okay, yeah, great. That sounds like a brilliant idea. Almost, when do I start? And they were quite sort of serious about the whole thing, and so they didn't give me enough, I think, of what they wanted out of that output at the time. They kind of got me to go, yeah, and then it all started. And I was commuting from Canterbury to Leicester Square every morning. I was driving, I was parking under the Swiss Centre, and then walking across Leicester Square, bumping into Tarrant on the stairs, all of that was going on. But they said, look, what we want is a straight breakfast show. We don't want any gimmicks, we don't want any fun, we don't want any laughter. XFM, it's all about the music. It's all about playing the tunes that XFM should do. You literally have to do This Is, That Was. You do that, you're going to have a news person, you're also going to have a sports person, who was the amazing Helen Chamberlain from Soccer AM.
Yeah, blimey.
And she would come in twice an hour. She was my saviour, really. She was the one who kept me sane, because she was brilliant, very funny, very entertaining. But we don't want you doing anything. And at the time, we were in one of the very small studios at Leicester Square. They'd only just bought it. And so they'd done about a month of playing, in my opinion, probably the wrong music. There was a lot of angry listeners out there that had heard that XFM had been bought by what they deemed to be the devil that was Capital, that then was playing soft rock and things like that. I was going, and there was no real social media at the time, but there was Digital Spy at the time, and there were people with bricks, and so you had abuse on Digital Spy and bricks through the window. Brilliant. And I was in the middle of that doing a breakfast show, and getting quite a lot of hard time from Des Shaw for maybe, having possibly a bit too much of a smile in my voice, whatever. It was tough. I was leaving Canterbury at sort of 3:30 in the morning, getting back, I don't know, 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. It was grim, really. Bob Geldof, and it then transpired why Des was there. Bob Geldof was doing drive time. And the other thing that made it quite tricky was that a lot of the office staff of X were those left over from the old X at Charlotte Street. And so they were almost as bitter as the listeners.
Really, yeah. That sounds hideous. A hideous situation to be in.
Yeah. And they never really asked whether I knew anything about music, or they just assumed that this, bonkers commercial radio jock from Kent had been drafted in. And so they were hard work. And there were a few bits of sunshine. John Kennedy, who's still there. What a lovely man. He was great. Helen Chamberlain was awesome. That was the thing. You never got to speak to Bob. He would turn up and he would go into an office with Des, and they would sit around on the days that I was still there, and then he would do his show. You'd never see him. Rumour has it that he didn't have a parking space, and so would just park on the street, just the other side. The other exit. What's the main road? The other side of Leicester Square.
I don't know. I was never lucky enough to work in London. I haven't got a clue. Sorry, James. Yeah,
he would just park there. He'd just get parking tickets. Didn't care. Just park there, do the show, and then head off again. So yeah, it was a tough time. I mean, in that time, Claire and I got married as well, and I had 2 weeks off for a honeymoon. So all of that happened at the same time, and not long after that, Richard called me into his office. He went, "Dear boy." I went, "Hi, Richard. Yeah, I've got a new challenge for you." I went, "Really?" I was quite exhausted by this. "How do you fancy doing early breakfast on XFM?" I think it was fairly swift. I went, "I'm terribly sorry, Richard. No, I can't do that. I really can't do that." One, because in my head I felt of it. Apologies to any early breakfast presenters listening, but I felt it was a little bit of a demotion. And also, I was getting up at 3:30 anyway to do 6 till 10, and he wanted 4 till 6. And I said, "I'm really sorry, Rich. I can't accept that." "No, don't worry, dear boy. No, that's fine. Yeah." Claire and I had also been looking for houses in London at the time, and I think this was a sign to say, yeah, this isn't going to be continuing. But to give Richard and Clive, I suppose, their due, they went, okay, no, that's cool. Just go back to Invicta. Go back to your old job. Go back to doing drive on Invicta. Chris Finn was doing drive. He was shifted to afternoons. I think he was okay about it. I think he's recovered. And I ended up going, literally, I think it must have been about a year I'd been at X, went back to my old job as if nothing had ever happened.
There's just a couple of things I'd like to talk about first before we move on to Invicta again. Because, of course, what I've really loved listening to in your voice is the passion, the excitement, and the hard work that you put into your career. And you were, when you were doing evenings before XFM, you were obviously, you were well on your way into a successful career. And then for that to happen, that must have been a really difficult period in your life to look back and go, I was doing really well, and now I'm on this, and it's not what I really thought it would be. Was it tough?
It was, but it was still radio, and I was still doing it. And I think I was strong enough to not get too sort of emotional about the fact that it was a tough time. And again, I don't know why. I think even through all of that, I was going, I don't think this will be the end. I don't think if I say no to Richard for doing early breakfast to make way for Tom Binns, not sure we can mention him because he's a bit dodged out.
Yeah, probably not. Let's bleep that one out, Simon.
Bleep that out because he's got, yeah. Anyway, I sort of feel, even if I do say no in this office now, I don't think it'll be the end. I'd never expected that he would say, well, dear boy, go back to Kent, go and be Mr. Kent for me. I didn't expect that, but I knew that somehow something would work out. But it was funny time. I mean, I remember I never took a day off, and there was one morning I was so ill. I had a fever of God knows what, and I left the house, at 3:30, and I had to pull over. I pulled over in a lay-by on the A2. And I had to sort of sleep for a little bit, and I still got there on time. But I was, I remember that, and then just coming home, just, so drenched with sweat from having a high temperature, having done the show. but I was there. I was a trooper, John.
Well, do you know, I mean, it's funny, you've just reminded me of when Giuliano and I first went to BRMB, and initially before we got breakfast, we went there to do drive. And for that first year, we didn't take one day off. And that's because we wanted to get it right, and also we were petrified that we'd be found out. I mean, just working every day for a year, I mean, we were knackered at the end of it every week, just absolutely shattered. It was hard work.
And you say that to a lot of people that don't do the job, and they go, well, how hard is it? You're just there standing having a chat and playing music. Well, there's a little bit more of a science to it than that, and there's a little bit more, there's a little bit more creativity and crafting that goes into it, and that's why hopefully people listened. And I remember being told quite early on by Steve Ellis back at Fox, he said, you just, the success of a radio presenter, mainly on a music station, is you've just got to be someone that people want to spend time with. And if you can do that, then you'll be fine. And I suppose through those years of Isle of Wight radio a little bit, Hospital Radio, Fox, and to a certain extent a bit of Invicta, you had the people you admire, you had your heroes on the radio, and a little bit of them would come through. You'd be going, I still am a huge Nick Abbott fan, and I'm sounding a little bit Nick Abbott, or I'm playing a few little sound effects and stuff, or I'm sounding a little bit Gary Davis, or But ultimately, I don't know when that crossover is, but suddenly it all boils down, doesn't it? To you've done so many hours on it, in and out of radio stations, in and out of shows, and you become yourself. Never. It's not that I wasn't myself a lot of the time, but there was always something else coming in. But eventually, there's a crossover where okay, I'm not thinking really about other radio heroes of mine. I'm just doing the job as me.
Yeah, absolutely. The other point I wanted to make alongside asking how you felt when you went to XFM was, the other point is that they must have really liked you, because to send you back to your old job, I've never heard that anywhere in the industry. Because normally, once you move on, that place has gone, hasn't it? That's done and dusted. Someone's filled your shoes. They're now the new hero, and you're gone. You're nothing but a distant memory. But they wanted to send you back, which I just think is incredible.
Yeah, and when you say it like that, you go, yeah, that was, because I don't think of it. You're right. I hadn't heard of anyone else that happening to. I even got a welcome home party.
Did you really?
Yeah, we all went out to the pub and there were balloons and everything. I mean, you know, I've been gone a year. So, yeah, I mean, that's fairly unique. It is. And I suppose, yeah, I am grateful for it, because it continued, and I continued at Invicta, and what was it? Probably about a year later, Neil Francis was doing Capital. He moved to Capital to do evenings. Lewis Clark was the program controller now. So we're late 1999, early 2000s. Neil leaves and he says, look, can you just cover breakfast for a bit while I find someone to replace Neil? Oh, no, fine. Okay. So I replaced Neil, but everyone else on the show stayed. Sam Hughes, various newsreaders. I can't remember now. Sorry, guys. It was great times, but sorry. So the days go into weeks, and then, the first month goes by, and I go into Lewis. I say, how are we getting on this? Because I've been off my show now for a month or so. I'm covering breakfast. I said, don't get me wrong, I'm enjoying it. It's great. But are you any further forward in the replacement? Yeah, mate, no. We're really close. We've got some great ideas. We've got someone who I think is going to be perfect. So I was getting quite bedded in to doing breakfast, and this went on and on and on, and this went on for 3 or 4 months, and it got to the point where I was going, well, this isn't going too badly, but you're still wanting to find someone better than me, which he was. And really, it was never really officially said that he'd stopped looking for someone else.
Really?
I like to look back on it and go, I was essentially a breakfast supply jock for 19 and a half years.
Well, this is where, it gets really interesting, because, you must be one of the longest serving breakfast presenters on the same station on the planet, surely.
There was something on Facebook recently where there was a list of some of them, and there are some that have now done more than me. But I think at the time when I finished back in 2019, I think it was so frustrating that I didn't quite make the round number of 20 years. It was 19 years and 8 months or something like that. It was close. And I remember even emailing Ashley Tabor and saying, any chance that I could just get the 20 years? I actually sent him an email. He was very nice. He just sent back. It was a lovely email, essentially saying no. but I just wanted that round number, and it was really frustrating. But yeah, it's a long time, isn't it? Five shows a week, 4 hours a day, 20 hours a week of radio.
I keep looking at that number 19, and it is such a long time. And I'm just thinking, the things that happened in the world throughout that time, through 19 years, how the world must have changed in 19 years, how even radio as well must have changed in 19 years. The amount of bosses, the amount of co-presenters you must have had, salespeople going through the door. It's such a long time, James, isn't it?
No, it is crazy. And there were significant times. There was 9/11. There was other significant, people passing away. There was the entire change of radio station. There was Invicta changing to Heart. There was, I think, 7 different co-hosts, female co-hosts. There was an amazing time in the early noughties of it being an entire male-driven breakfast show. There was myself, Ant Payne, Tony Shepherd, Craig Rance, Andy Walker, and a female program controller, Rebecca Travojevic. I mean, and I've kept quite a lot of stuff, and I was listening back to that. Oh my God, what we got away with. Just phenomenal. I mean, and you listen back to things, I suppose, through rose-tinted spectacles, but you listen back and you go, well, that was actually quite funny. I mean, a lot of it was ridiculously wrong. I mean, just, you would never get away with it now at all. And I always remember, Rebecca, if it was going, and that was the other thing, John, we wouldn't really, and I know this sounds terrible to people who might be listening to this wanting to start a career in radio, we didn't really plan an awful lot.
Did you know? I love this.
We kind of went in there and dicked about, but it was great fun. And Ant Payne, who is a very funny man, and Tony Shepherd, who was doing the news, again equally funny. Andy Walker was on travel, a brilliant scriptwriter. He would write very funny stuff, and it would just all come together, and it was so relaxed. And there was this moment. Actually, this was when Ali Wheeler was one of my co-hosts. She came in after the guys had left. They'd moved on to do various other things. Some of it not through their own choice, but that's another story. So I got a female co-host. I got Ali Wheeler, who I'm still in touch with now. We're great friends. And Michael Dobson was the
Dobbo. Yeah.
He was the producer, Dobbo. I mean, he was only 11 or something. I mean, he was, but again, an absolute master of making things happen, coming up with ideas, no fear. He was like a little Jack Russell, he'd just phone anyone up. He would do anything. It would happen because you were on Invicta and people would listen to it and go, well, I want to be part of that. So whatever Dobbo or I say, it'll happen. And we were very, very comfortable hanging out, messing around on the radio. And I remember there was this one phone-in we were doing about reminiscing about teachers at school. I think that was all it was. I don't know whether it was the worst teacher or the best teacher. It was just significant teachers that you remember at school. And so we were going around the table, and Dobbo, I think, was doing a bit on air at the time, so he did his, and he was still at school, I think. And Ali did hers, and I did mine. And I was describing this chemistry teacher that I remember, Mr. Clapper. He was a South African with, looking back on it now, obviously ridiculously high blood pressure. And he would just go crazy every now and again in these lessons if you were just messing around a little bit. And, again, showing my age here, but board rubbers would fly. And so I was reciting this story, and I ended it by saying, he was an absolute fucking nightmare. and suddenly I got about 6 pairs of eyes looking at me, going ashen. And I went, what? And I went, no, James, no. Right. Suddenly it clicked. I went, I'd got so passionate about telling this story, I'd completely forgotten I was on the radio and had said fucking nightmare with such force at sort of 20 past 8 in the morning. And so I knew the protocol. I knew what you needed to do in the unlikely but suddenly likely event that this has happened. I went, I'm terribly sorry about what you just heard. That was a complete accident. So you say, you apologize, you then play a song, and then you come back and you apologize again. And that's what we did. The program controller at the time was another top bloke called Craig Boddy, a Kiwi. And I don't think he was in the station at the time, but he came in later. So I did the protocol, but the amazing thing, and I do remember this vividly, the amazing thing was throughout all of that, obviously Dobbo and Ali were absolutely bricking themselves. They were going, right, this is the end. Well, what have you done? They were furious. I wasn't. I was fairly chilled about the whole thing. Probably because, you had the screen. At this time, there wasn't social media, but you had text messages. And the text message machine that was on the screen, the texts that came flooding in, there was not one horrible text. That was the funniest thing we've ever heard. James, you are amazing. That was, we've had to sort of explain to the kids, but there was no malice. Because I think it was probably because me saying it, people knew there was no malice.
Yeah, it was real.
It was real. And I wasn't saying it, I wasn't telling someone to F off or anything like that. I was just reciting this story. And it went on for a few days, people just going, that was the funniest thing we have ever heard. And to give him his due, Craig Body was very cool about it as well. And I think we did another apology around the same time the next day. And it was over and we carried on.
Do you know, when we had Mike Toolan do his episode, and he was on Key 103 for a substantial amount of time as well, and this is exactly the same for you as what he said. But when you're on a station for that long, you have people coming up to you, and I'm sure this has happened to you, saying, I used to listen to you, and then about 5 years later, someone comes and says, my mum or dad used to listen to you, and then 5 years later, someone says, my gran used to listen to you.
Yeah.
Has that moment happened to you? I mean, 19 years is such a lengthy time.
Yeah, it's happened numerous times, John. Yeah, and it was happening while I was on as well. People would come up to me. People wouldn't really. Luckily, people didn't recognise. It's not like being a visual known person. Not many people sort of bumped into you and went, "Oh, you're James Owen, aren't you?" If the moment arose at an event or whatever, they'd go, "Oh, I've been listening to you since primary school," and they, and now they've got kids, and you go, "Okay, yeah, I'm getting fairly old here," and even now, where I work now and things that I do, people are going, "Oh, I remember listening to you when I started school," and when significant times of their lives, and I suppose 19 years is a long time if you. From the age of 10, if you start listening, for example, at 10 years old, and you finish at 30, a lot's happened.
Oh yeah.
Being at a station for so long, I mean, it's not just 19 years, is it? I mean, you were there previous to XFM, and it's a long time to be in a county, to be in a station. Obviously, the reason you left Invicta or Heart as it was, I mean, was completely out of your control. I mean, can you just run me through the emotions on that last show, that last day, that day that you left that building for the final time?
So we'd found out that this was happening quite a lot in advance. I think it was about, from what I remember, Becky Ives and Matt Wilcock and co will probably correct me, but I think it was about 3 months that we knew, and that in itself is quite weird. You're going, okay, so I've got to carry on almost as if nothing's happened for 3 months, knowing that this will come to an end on this date in, I think it was May 2019, and I hope that program controllers of the time and people that were there would think that we kept it pretty professional. I certainly didn't end up going, well, I can't be asked anymore, right? Here's 5 songs in a row, forget it, sod ya. There was none of that. We ploughed everything into it for those 3 months. We wanted to definitely go out on a high, and that final day came, and it was surreal. For someone who can cry at even the most benign of TV shows, that's me. I managed to not shed a tear at all. Everyone else was a little bit messy, I have to say. And it got really close because I didn't know that Matt Wilcock, who now looks after JK and Co up in London, he'd said, right, he'd got in touch with Claire and all the family came in. And I didn't know that. And that was close. That was close. I nearly lost it then. Because you're standing there going, oh my God, you start in a radio style, you start going, this is the last commercial break. Oh, this is the last song. This is the last time I'm going to open that fader. This is the last back time to the news at 10. This is the last bit that Becky, myself and Matt are going to do. And then unlike the other stations, I knew that this wasn't then just going to transfer into something else. This was not me just going to go and find another job somewhere. This was a significant shift in the industry and a significant shift for me, being 49, and the fact that there was nothing else really to go to in the marketplace in Kent. I knew that this was the end. And so it was quite upsetting, but it wasn't upsetting as you should have kept me on. It was upsetting looking back and going, wow, look what we did for 19 years. It was just the amount of content. Oh my God. You don't think of it at the time, in real time, Monday to Friday, but the hours, both on air and off air, the ideas, the things that you did, and you look back on that, and I have done over the last 4 years or so. COVID was great for that. Plenty of time, going down that rabbit hole. You go, yeah, we did all right, and we didn't get fired. We didn't do badly or badly enough for people to go, we need to change this. You've kept it going for 19 years.
It's one hell of an achievement, an incredible achievement. You can't say the length that you were on Breakfast, but what would you say is your biggest achievement in your radio career?
As a general answer to that, doing it, because I think so many people wanted to or still want to do it, and there is no way in, and some people do it for a while, but I raised a family, kept a roof over my head, and earned a decent living for 25 years, quarter of a century, sounds more dramatic, doing the job that I'd always wanted to do, which I absolutely adored, and I still do. And the fact that I actually did that, through all the ups and downs and weird trials and tribulations of it, to stay employed pretty much consistently for that time, I think I'm pretty proud of. The fact that I worked on stations that were pretty big as well, Fox, phoning them up that rainy afternoon. Invicta, as I now know and soon got to know very early on when I moved here, big station. And I suppose I should mention that when Ant and Craig and when the morning zoo that was all blokes got blown up, I was fairly upset about this. And I had a call from Keith Pringle, who was running Capital at the time. And he said, would you like to do a couple of cover shifts on Capital? And so my other great feeling of achievement is that I was able to stand in a studio in Leicester Square and go on the air doing an afternoon show leading up to the Pepsi chart. I did it for about 4 weekends. I actually uttered those words, 95.8 Capital FM. I actually was on that radio station.
I often ask my guests who they would like to hear on their own episode of Crunch and Roll. Who would you like to hear, James?
Can I have more than one?
You're a legend, James. You can have as many as you want.
I'd love to hear Phil Angel, who was at Fox, who did do, funnily enough, because he was part of he joined, was it the Wireless Group or UKRD? He ended up down in Cornwall. He's still down there. He did do Pirate FM Breakfast for a bit. An absolute master, a proper wordsmith, brilliant man, very funny. It'd be great for him, I think, to be, because he's he doesn't blow his own trumpet at all. But I'm sure he would have some great stories. And then from not necessarily the sort of the on-air side, but to hear from them how it all started, Carl Pilkington would be good, because he was
brilliant.
He was just a producer at Invicta for a while, and just making jingles and ads and things like that. And we had a great time. And he then moved around the same time. He moved to X with me and was then the station producer there. And that's where, Ricky and Stephen got him, because he was TOing their show, and they saw something in him, and the rest is history. But he was exactly the same 30 years ago as he is now.
Do you know the thing for me, and you said something which I've written down, because I don't know if I'd forgotten it, but occasionally, people will talk to me about getting into the industry, and I scream at them and say, "Don't bother." No, I occasionally, maybe on our Twitter page, Crunch and Roll Twitter page, people will get in touch and ask how they would get in to radio. And what you said about just being that person that people want to spend time with is so true, isn't it?
It is, and it's such a simple phrase, isn't it, as well? And it may not happen immediately. As I was saying, it's you will be influenced by, if you're big into radio and loving hearing, the people that you love craft their job, then that's always going to wash off on you. And eventually, if you spend long enough at it, you will be someone that people want to spend time with. And I think also it's really important to say that, and it's not cheapening the job, I think anyone can do it. You don't have to have a voice. You don't have to have necessarily this amount of knowledge, or, it's just, it's a character thing, isn't it? It's a character that people can go, I like this. This is good fun. I enjoy listening to it. You don't have to be technical. Johnny Vaughan's not technical. Someone else presses his buttons. But is it absolute essential listening for me on the drive home? Absolutely. Of course it is, because he's amazing. So it's being that human, and then honing that craft, being taught how to deliver things so that you keep people interested, but still at the same time being you.
James, can I just say thank you so much for being on Crunch and Roll. It has been a fascinating listen to your career. It has been truly brilliant, so thank you.
Not at all, John. I mean, it's cathartic, isn't it?
Everybody we've had on has said at some point, be it on the episode or before or after, that this is therapy. And I'm happy. I'm happy to sit here and listen if it makes people feel better.
Well, thank you, John, and thank you, dear listener.
Would you be so kind as to take us home with the end credits?
You've been listening to Crunch and Roll with me, James Hemming. Subscribe on your favourite podcast app to get every new episode as soon as they drop. Crunch and Roll is a 969 media production, presented by John Fox and produced by Simon Bosowski.